The file came across the table before she even sat down. Staff Sergeant Voss caught it by reflex. 2 fingers, barely a grip, and set it flat without looking at it. Colonel Thatcher didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, and watched her the way men watch things they're not sure are real. "You know why you're here," he said. It wasn't a question, so Voss didn't answer it. She'd been in the Army 9 years. She knew the difference between a briefing and an audition. The folder had her name on it, her full name, rank MOS, every evaluation she'd ever been given. She didn't need to open it. She'd lived it. Qualified expert on every weapons system she'd ever touched. Distinguished graduate, sniper course, Fort Benning. Top of her class in advanced surveillance. The Army had spent 4 years teaching her to kill things at 1,000 meters, and then spent the next 5 years finding reasons not to let her. Thatcher finally spoke. "You're being considered for an advisory role with Task Force Vanguard, 12-man element, operating out of northern Somalia. 12 weeks. Voss nodded once. "I want to be clear." Thatcher said that this decision was not unanimous. She looked at him then, not because he surprised her, because she wanted him to see that he hadn't. "It never is," she said. Task Force Vanguard was based out of a forward operating base that had no official name on any map she'd been given. The men called it the gravel pit, which described it accurately. A flat stretch of compacted rock and blown dust surrounded by HESCO barriers and concertina wire, 40 kilometers from the nearest paved road, 2 hours by helicopter from anything resembling a hospital. She flew in on a Thursday evening. The sun was already going down when the Black Hawk set her on the pad, and the heat was the kind that stays in your lungs. The team was assembled near the operations building when she arrived, 12 men. Most of them didn't look up. A few did, assessed, looked away. One of them, Sergeant First Class Decker. She'd find out later, 15 years in 2 combat deployments as a ranger before cross-training to special operations, looked at her gear, then at her face, and said nothing. Master Sergeant Colm Egan was the team sergeant. He was built like a man who'd been pressed flat and rebuilt once, thick through the shoulders, face weathered past what age alone could account for. He shook her hand in the way men shake hands when they're being polite but not welcoming. "Voss," he said. "Sergeant." He looked at her for a moment. "You'll be in bunk 3. Brief is at 0600. That was it. No orientation, no introduction to the team. She found bunk 3 herself, stowed her kit, and lay on the mattress listening to the generators run outside. She'd known it would be like this. She'd been told by people who thought they were warning her. These guys don't want you there. They'll freeze you out. They'll make it impossible. What the people who told her that didn't understand was that she hadn't spent 9 years in the Army expecting to be wanted. She'd spent 9 years being effective enough that it didn't matter. She slept well. She always did. The brief the next morning was delivered by Captain Renfro, the troop commander, a lean man in his mid-30s, with the particular kind of calm that either comes from experience or from not yet understanding what he was dealing with. In this case, it appeared to be experience. The objective was a facilitator network operating across 3 districts, moving weapons and personnel across the border. The task force had been working the problem for 6 weeks. 2 previous operations had come close, yielded partial intelligence, disrupted one node. The network had adapted. There was a man they called Samir, not his real name, a convenience who sat at the center of it. He moved constantly, rarely stayed in any one location more than 48 hours, and had survived 3 previous interdiction attempts by different units. He was cautious, well-resourced, and had people watching the roads. The plan being developed required long-range observation of a compound outside a village the maps labeled Dusamareb. 4 days of eyes on before any direct action. The terrain offered one viable position, a ridgeline to the northwest, 800 meters out, with partial concealment from a dry riverbed, 800 meters. Voss had made shots at 1300 in training. She said nothing during the brief. She listened, mapped the angles in her head, noted what they hadn't asked her. After the brief, as the team dispersed to their prep tasks, Decker fell into step beside her on the way to the equipment bay. "You qualified on the MRAD?" he asked. "The rifle. Multi-role adaptive design. The platform the team used for long-range work." "Yes." He nodded, not impressed, not dismissive. "Processing. What's your longest confirmed shot?" 1140, she said. "Crosswind. Moving target." He looked at her sideways. "In training or Mosul?" 2019. He was quiet for a moment. Then okay. That was the first real word anyone said to her at the gravel pit. The 4 days before the operation were not kind to her. It wasn't hostility, exactly. It was exclusion. The difference between a wall and a locked door. The team had rhythms, shorthand, rituals that 9 years together build without anyone intending to build them. Inside jokes she wasn't supposed to understand. Task assignments that didn't include her. Meals where she sat at one end of the table and conversation happened at the other. She understood what was being communicated. She wasn't in the team. She was attached to the team. She was a resource, and resources don't eat at the table. They sit on the shelf until someone needs them. Egan watched all of this. She noticed that. He watched, and he said nothing in either direction. On the third night, she was cleaning her optics at the workbench when Decker came in to do maintenance on his own kit. He set up at the far end without speaking. They worked in parallel for 20 minutes in silence. Then he said without looking up, "You know, most of the guys don't think this is about you, right?" She kept her cloth moving across the lens. "I know. It's the situation. Last 2 times someone got attached to a team out here, it was political. Someone's cousin needed a deployment. Someone needed a box checked. Guys got hurt because they were babysitting." "I know," she said again. "You're going to have to let them see you. I'm not hiding." He looked up then. She held his gaze. "No," he said. "I guess you're not." He went back to his kit. She went back to hers. It wasn't a breakthrough. It wasn't a conversation that changed anything. But it was honest, and in a place like the gravel pit, honest was sometimes enough to work with. They inserted on foot 4 kilometers in the hour before dawn. Voss carried, the rifle system broken down across her back, the components distributed to reduce profile. She moved without sound, which surprised the men around her the first time they heard it, or rather, didn't hear it. She'd spent 2 years learning to move before she'd been allowed to shoot. The movement was older than the marksmanship. The observation post was a scrape in the rocky earth behind a natural berm, wide enough for 2 shooters and a spotter, covered with a scrim net that matched the terrain so well it disappeared at 10 meters. They'd prepped it the night before, Voss and Decker working in silence, while 2 security elements held the perimeter. She settled into position at 0430 and didn't move for 7 hours. This was the part of the job that no one ever made films about, the stillness. The hours of watching nothing happen, of cataloging patterns, who left the compound when, which gate, how long, what route back. The mind had to stay engaged without staying tense, a state that was harder to teach than shooting and rarer to find in people who'd been trained to be aggressive. Voss had been doing it for 9 years. She'd gotten good at it the hard way, by being bored and by staying anyway. Decker was in the hide beside her, spotting. He was efficient, economical with his words, called what he saw without commentary. She appreciated that. Some spotters narrated. Some narrated too much. Decker said exactly what was necessary. On the second day, she flagged a pattern he hadn't caught, a vehicle that moved through the village at irregular intervals, always pausing 60 meters short of the compound gate before proceeding. Not the same vehicle each time, different plates, different color, same pause. She relayed it through Decker to the operations cell. Renfro came back through the radio 30 minutes later. "Good catch, we're cross-referencing." Decker looked at her. "How long did you track it before you called?" "3 passes, she said. "I wanted to be sure." He was quiet. "Then, most guys would have called after one." "I know," she said. "That's why I waited." The compromise came on the 3rd night. Not from them. Discipline had done everything right. A shepherd, moving through terrain that should have been empty, crossed within 40 meters of their position just before 0200. They went flat, held for 90 minutes, didn't breathe wrong. The man moved on, but 20 minutes later, lights came on in the compound. Voss watched through the scope. "They're moving vehicles," she said quietly. Decker relayed. The operations cell came back fast. "Assets confirmed secondary movement at northern edge. Possible exfil. You are cleared hot on primary if he presents." The compound gate opened. She picked up Samir through the scope because she'd been watching him for 3 days, and she knew the way he walked, slightly favoring the left leg, hands never visible. Always one person close on his right. She knew the distance, she knew the wind, it had shifted at 2130, and she'd recalculated twice since then. She had the solution, but he was moving toward a vehicle, and there were civilians, a woman, 2 children, in the lane behind him, close enough that a miss or a pass-through changed the math entirely. "I don't have a clean shot," she said. "How long?" Decker asked. "He reaches the vehicle, I lose him." The radio crackled. "Renfro, Voss, what's your status?" "Negative on the shot," she said. "Civilian interference. He's 20 seconds from the vehicle." Silence on the net. Then Renfro again. and she could hear the tension in his voice, but also beneath it the discipline. Copy, hold. We're working secondary interdiction. Samir reached the vehicle. The door closed, the convoy moved north. She released a slow breath and kept the scope up, cataloging everything she could still see. 3 minutes later, the secondary element, 2 vehicles, cutting through the northern track, bracketed the convoy. Clean stop, no shots fired. Samir was in custody before she'd broken down her first component. She heard it on the radio and kept packing without comment. It was only later, back at the gravel pit, debriefing in the operations cell, that Renfro said to the room, "The decision not to shoot was the right call. We got him clean. No collateral. That is exactly the judgment this mission required." He looked at her when he said it. So did half the room. She didn't look away. She didn't perform modesty. She'd made the right call, and she knew it, and she let that be enough. The night after the debrief, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No one made a speech. No one pulled her aside and apologized. What happened was simpler. She sat down at dinner, in the middle of the table, and no one moved away, and conversation didn't stop. Egan sat across from her. He ate in silence for a while and then said, without preamble, "Your read on the vehicle pattern. That bought us 24 hours we didn't have." "It was observable," she said. "Plenty of things are observable," he said. "Not everyone sees them." She looked at him. He wasn't the kind of man who said things he didn't mean, and she'd learned that much about him in a week. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said. He nodded and went back to eating. 2 seats down, Decker was telling a story about a goat they'd encountered on the 3rd night that she hadn't known about. Apparently an altercation had occurred while she was on the scope, and 2 of the other men were laughing, and one of them turned to her and started explaining from the beginning, as if she'd been there, as if she was part of the story. She listened. She laughed once, at the right moment. It was a small thing. It was the kind of small thing that only means something if you know what it costs to get there. The second operation came 11 days later, and it was nothing like the first. The intelligence had a shorter shelf life, 12 hours from confirmation to movement, and the terrain was different, open ground with minimal concealment, which changed the geometry entirely. The ridgeline that would have given her clean angles was outside the planning window. They had to work with what was available. What was available was a rooftop on the southeastern edge of the village, 600 meters from the target compound, accessible through a single alley that had to be cleared before she could move. The security element would be thin. The exfil route was a single track that the intelligence said was passable, but hadn't been confirmed by anyone they trusted in 72 hours. In the planning session, she walked through her concerns in sequence. The alley, the route, the timeline for setup and breakdown. She didn't hedge. She laid out the risk as she understood it, said what she could mitigate and what she couldn't, and told Renfro and Egan what she needed to make it work. When she finished, Egan said, "Questions." There were 3. Decker asked 2 of them. The third came from a man named Price, the team medic, quiet, who had said almost nothing to her since she'd arrived, and it was a good question, about her window at the end of the operation if the primary route was compromised. She answered it honestly. She'd have to move fast. She'd need 30 seconds of cover from someone at the alley entrance, and if it went wrong, she was going to be out in the open. Price nodded slowly. Then he said, "I'll be at the alley. Give me the signal and go." It was practical. It was tactical. And she understood that it was also something else, a decision he'd made quietly, to be the person who had her exit covered. She looked at him. "Thank you." "Don't miss," he said. She didn't. The shot was 580 meters. Clean air, minimal wind, stable platform. Textbook in all the ways that matter except the ones that can't be taught in a classroom. She had 4 seconds from the moment the target appeared in the doorway, backlit and exposed and unaware, to the moment he would have stepped back inside. She took 2 of them to be certain, to confirm the identification, to see the security posture, to know there was no one in the lane behind him, that the angle hadn't shown her from the ground. She fired once. Then she was moving. Price was at the alley entrance, exactly where he'd said he'd be, and when she came through at a dead run with the rifle across her back, he fell into step behind her without a word, covering their rear all the way to the vehicle. They were 3 kilometers out when the radio confirmed. Egan said nothing for a moment. Then, "Good work, Voss." It was 2 words. In a vehicle full of people who valued economy, it was enough. The last week at the gravel pit was different from the first in ways she couldn't fully account for by adding up the individual moments. She ran with the team in the mornings. She was slower than most of them over long distance. She'd always been better built for precision than for endurance. But she held her pace and finished what she started, and no one commented either way, which was its own form of respect. She ate with them. She listened to the stories she was now included in, the names and places that made up a shared history she hadn't been part of, and she didn't try to insert herself into things she hadn't earned. She asked questions when she had them. She kept her answers short. Decker, 4 days before she was due to rotate out, sat down next to her at the workbench, the same Mercer, and said, "You know, when they told us we were getting a female advisory attachment, I thought it was a political thing." "I know," she said. "I was wrong." She looked at him. He wasn't performing humility. He was just saying what was true. "You were working with bad information," she said. "You assessed based on what you had." He seemed to consider that for a moment. "That's generous." "It's accurate," she said. "When you got new information, you updated." He was quiet. Then, "Most people don't say it like that. Most people want an apology," she said. "I wanted the job." He nodded slowly. "Did you?" She looked at the lens in her hand. "Yeah," she said. "I think so." Her last morning at the gravel pit, Egan found her at the helicopter pad 40 minutes before her flight. He was carrying a patch. She recognized it. The Task Force Vanguard patch, the one the men wore on their kit. He held it out without ceremony, without speech. She took it, turned it over in her hands. The stitching was worn on the edges, which meant it was off someone's kit and not out of supply. "Whose is this?" she asked. "Price's spare," Egan said. He had two. She looked at him. He wasn't sentimental. She'd had 12 days to learn that. And this wasn't sentiment, it was recognition, the same kind that had nothing to do with words. "Tell him I said thank you," she said. "Tell him yourself," Egan said. "He's right behind you." She turned. Price was standing 10 feet away with his hands in his pockets, looking at the sky with the studied nonchalance of a man pretending he hadn't walked out there for a specific reason. When he heard her turn, he looked at her and said, "Don't lose it." "I won't," she said. The helicopter came down hard out of the morning sun, kicking up dust and noise, and Voss picked up her kit and walked toward it, the patch in her breast pocket. The weight of it lighter than she'd expected and heavier than anything she'd been given in 9 years. She didn't look back. She didn't need to.